I snapped. I went into dissociative rage. It was kind of like a wake up call where I was like, all right, how did I get here? How do I make sure this never happens again? If I can do one and two, can I have number three, which I've never had before, which is a healthy relationship? Previously, all of my relationships followed a similar pattern, although it never ever gotten, I had never really escalated to the point of physicality. So then this is where I stopped working. I started studying attachment theory, polyvagal theory, somatic experiencing, integrating shadow work, parts work. And I stopped doing all the things that distracted me from this unworthy little boy that wanted to prove that he was worthy to his father. And so that's where this concept of becoming trigger proof was born. Not that you don't get triggered, but I realized that the shame that I was carrying, the unworthiness, was so deep in there that I created an identity of a Dr. Nima character to kind of cope with the paralyzing insecurity of feeling not enough.
What if the biggest obstacle standing between you and the life you want isn't your business? Isn't your finances, is not your relationships, but your nervous system? Today's conversation challenged some of my own assumptions, and I think it's going to challenge yours too. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of the Perpetual Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Palmer. Here we believe growth isn't something you achieve once. It's something you choose every single day. Whether that's in business, your health, your relationships, or becoming the kind of leader and human being you are capable of becoming. Today's guest has spent decades helping people understand something most of us have never been taught. Why intelligent, successful, high-achieving people often stay stuck in unhealthy patterns despite doing all things right. Nima Rahmany is a chiropractor turned educator, entrepreneur, speaker, creator of the Overview Method, and someone who's dedicated his career to helping people uncover the hidden emotional patterns that quietly shape nearly every aspect of life. Today, we're talking about trauma, attachment, nervous system regulation, codependency, people pleasing, chronic stress, and why healing isn't just psychological, it's biological. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a parent, a spouse, or simply someone trying to become healthier, this conversation might explain things you've wondered about for years. Let's jump in. Nima, most people hear words like trauma, attachment wounds, or nervous system regulation and immediately think that doesn't apply to me. Yet you argue that many of the highest performing people in the world are living with patterns they don't even recognize.
Yeah,
Why?
absolutely.
Yeah.
You think of what causes you to be a high performer. And oftentimes, in my experience, especially looking at myself, it comes from a wound. This wound from childhood that had you, let's say, in a sibling dynamic where you're, for example, one of my clients, you have a twin brother who is always getting the praise and the recognition. That wound of not enoughness drives this ambition to prove. So when you look at for example, when I look at the first half of my career, as a chiropractor, the whole thing was based on the whole thing was based on an attempt to try to prove my father wrong, right? And anytime you are the entire foundation of a relationship, the foundation of a career, the foundation of a business is built on the energetics of needing to prove, the energetics of resentment, the energetics of not enoughness. It's unsustainable. So
Mm.
that's why I was gifted with a colossal meltdown in my relationship in my early 40s, which things got volatile, and that we usually when we base the foundation on a wound, it's unsustainable. So then we're going to have a wake up call, whether it be a betrayal, there's an affair that happens in the relationship, whether it is a health crisis or a financial collapse. It's the wake up call which causes us to look, if we're intelligent about it, and go, all right, so how did I get into this situation? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And in my case, after my last relationship became abusive, where I physically slapped my ex, it was my wake up call going, how did I get into a dynamic like this?
Mm.
I started to unpack it all and realize that the entire foundation of my whole identity was based on a wound.
Wow.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
very
that's
costly
deep.
for us and unsustainable.
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, there's a couple important things you say there. I mean, there's the intelligence piece, and then there's the awareness. I mean, I think a lot of people recognize patterns, but they don't ever take the step back, the opportunity to zoom out and even ask themselves, do I have the ability to change this? A lot of
Yeah,
people fall in the trap of it's just who I am. I can't
correct.
stand those words combined together because I'm like,
That's
who
my
you
dad.
are.
That's my
It's
dad. You just said my dad right
oh,
there.
well, yeah.
Can't change it. It's who we
No,
are.
no, it's who
Yeah.
we're becoming, is my belief. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, now let's unpack this a bit more. I think a great place to start is tell us a bit more about your story. I mean, how does somebody go from chiropractor to becoming known as a stress doctor to dedicating your whole life to emotional healing?
Yeah. So again, when I was younger, I wanted to be a chiropractor. My parents were like, "Why don't you be a real doctor?" And it was that proving energy that I'm going to be successful and prove to them that what I chose is right. So my entire career was based on that proving energy. And when you're in proving energy, you're very kind of like narcissistically ego driven, forward facing because deep down I don't feel like I'm enough. I need to bulldoze and push and force in order to get there. And so the problem with that is that it works. It actually is very effective. You go into the reading the books on manifesting and you're going to make shit happen. And so you're going in this very charging, anxious, driven, ambitious type of energy. And I met this woman after I got divorced. I got divorced, and then several failed relationships later leads me to this one woman who introduced me to the concept of codependency. She was codependent. I didn't know what that was, but I had done a lot of personal development work just for my own, when you're driving this entire bus on a wound, it's very anxiety producing. So I went into personal development to kind of understand this entrepreneurial anxiety within me. And this is where I found the work of Dr. John Demartini and teaching how to change my thoughts and perceptions to change the perspective of those really harmful things that I perceived in my past to liberate myself. And so it was really powerful. And I started to integrate this work into my practice because patients were coming to me with really aches and pains and chronic conditions that when you really look at these things, Zach, they're really stress related disorders. So so I would create these little workshops in my office called Life Skills for a Stressful World. And I really enjoyed the teaching aspect. And I found that when the patients came in and learned how to become their own medicine, their outcomes in the clinic were a lot better. So that alongside of the fact that I had, after my divorce, I started this really toxic kind of codependent relationship with this woman where the sex was fantastic and it kept we just got pulled in. We would argue a lot. We were fighting all the time, and then we would have makeup sex, and then we would fight all the time and makeup sex. And I didn't realize that push and pull dynamic was called a trauma bond.
Mhm.
I didn't understand what that was. I hadn't studied attachment work, but the as I left my chiropractic practice and she was really helping me build this new kind of identity and career as a facilitator and teacher. Deep down, she was a former sex worker, so she wanted some sort of kind of credibility and legitimacy to get out of that business. She was kind of like running she was a madam for an online kind of booking agency for sex workers. So she went from that to being kind of like a madam. And so she really wanted out of that world. So I wanted out of the chiropractic world. So together we kind of like merged into this one unit. And it was very successful. I left my chiropractic practice, but lo and behold, now we were locked into this dynamic. She wanted a future with me as far as marriage, that kind of thing. I just wanted to keep it cash. And so that was the classic push and pull dynamic of the anxious, which she was, which I was the avoidant, which I didn't know at the time. But slowly over time, uh, things became more volatile. Arguments became more like intense. And in March 2018, after a fight, like we did a workshop, after a 5 hour argument that led into 2 a.m., I slapped her. It just I snapped. I went into dissociative rage. And then it was kind of like a wake up call where I was like, all right, how did I get here? How do I make sure this never happens again? And if I can do one and two, can I have number three, which I've never had before, which is a healthy relationship? Previously, all of my relationships followed a similar pattern, although it never ever gotten I had never really escalated to the point of physicality. So then this is where I stopped working. I started studying attachment theory, polyvagal theory, somatic experiencing, integrating shadow work, parts work. And I stopped doing all the things that distracted me from this unworthy little boy that wanted to prove that he was worthy to his father. And so that's where this concept of becoming trigger proof was born. Not that you don't get triggered, but I realized that the shame that I was carrying, the unworthiness, was so deep in there that I created an identity of a Dr. Nima character to kind of cope with the paralyzing insecurity of feeling not enough. And so understanding all of that and really learning how to what's called integrate these shadow parts of us, uh, felt a deep sense of self-love, expansion of my capacity to be able to hold discomfort and criticism and all of these things that would cause me to get activated and defensive. And then I started to learn, I said, how do I have better relational skills? Because all the money in the world and the fame and all that, you can't, it doesn't lend to you. It actually works against you, and being able to have real deep intimacy and a sense of emotional safety within a relational dynamic. So as I went through the whole process, I found my amazing wife, Diana. We have now, at the recording of this, a 5-year-old son, just finished his kindergarten. And I have an online community of people who are really dedicated to breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma. I realized that what I was carrying didn't start with me. So it's really about going into the biology and releasing that stuck survival stress, so that now when I'm serving people, it's not to prove anything. It's kind of like in a genuine posture of service and healing my relationship with my parents and, intergenerational wounding. So I teach what I needed the most.
Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, I love the depth and breadth of your journey, and thank you for sharing all that. And there's several things that come to mind. I mean, one, I
Sure.
relate to this on an extremely high level. I think that so often we pursue passions and careers and areas of service when we're trying to heal the person inside first, and it becomes an external projection. But at some point along that journey, you realize I was really doing this for me, at least initially. But then we get to share that gift much more externally, create that ripple effect. And
The hero's journey.
yes, absolutely. And what find so fascinating about this is, as I personally delved into studies about attachment theory and, worked, put in the work to work through integration and heal from personal traumas, which was not, a short journey. It took a fair amount of time and introspection and working with other individuals and patience, frankly. Um, I found that, I believe many individuals in today's world and society, if not the overwhelming majority, are struggling with unhealthy attachment styles. I'd love to have you expand upon that because you did a great job of showing it from your perspective. And I think many of our
Mm.
listeners I know could relate to various aspects of those behaviors, the emotional states, the traumas. But then also as a man, we're not conventionally
Trained.
trained to showcase that type of vulnerability or go into that type of introspective state. You hear words like trauma, and most men, the walls immediately come up, and it's like trauma. I don't have that stuff. It's like the militant aspect of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
from I guess a few different perspectives, if you could start to help unpack for our listeners, and because
Yeah.
I know they'll be relating to this, because it affects us both in our personal and professional lives. And then, of course, those are going to cross
100%.
over and affect one another. Let's start with the interpersonal aspect of things. I mean, when you think about the different attachment styles, maybe you could give a high level introduction to our listeners as to what some of those are and what some of the
Yeah.
common patterns are that might help them start generating that initial awareness. So now we can start having the right conversations. I mean, at least
Yeah.
first step down the path.
Awareness is the first step, Zach. So what
Mhm.
I'll do is I will leave a link in your show notes for anybody that really wants to learn what their attachment style pattern is, because that was where I began. Now, first and foremost, what is trauma? I want to define what trauma is. Trauma is not necessarily what happened to you,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's physical violence, whether it's sexual abuse, whether survived like earthquakes or whatever. It's not what happens to you, to us. It's what's happening inside of us. This charge, this energy that rises up. And if we don't have parents that are what's called attuned to be able to sit and be that safe kind of container and provide what's called containment, which is a kind of like a lightning rod to sit down where all of that charged energy can discharge with a safe witness, that energy, that charge stays within us. Okay. And it gets stored, and it actually doesn't just get stored or trapped. It actually shapes who we are. So for example, let's say speaking your truth resulted in you getting hit, right? So that shapes you. And nobody sat down with you afterward and said, "Oh, Zach, that must have been really hard. What did you feel like?" And, "Oh, that must have been hard. I'm here for you. I can't take your pain away, but I'm here and I'm witnessing you." If nobody was there for that, what happens in Zach's nervous system is that activation rises up, and there is no safe witness to discharge and release that charge shapes you. So what'll happen is there's an opportunity for Zach to speak his truth, but then as he's about to speak, his body will remember the consequence. So he's going to suppress it. You might even have some tension happening in your throat because your throat is trying to protect you by holding in your truth. And that kind of constriction, so it works out, it feels like constriction in your body. That's why, as a chiropractor, patients are coming in and they're tight in their shoulders. Well, why? Oh, I've been arguing with my adult kid, and they've got no contact, and I've just been holding it like this. And then you go to the chiropractor, you get it adjusted, but you're not dealing with the energetic charge that caused it in the first place, right? So it's what's happening inside of us without a kind of like a completion, right? So in a relational dynamic, there are this with our parents, depending on how consistent they were in showing up for us. The questions you want to ask is, how did they respond to these big outbursts of emotion? Did they invalidate you? Did they tell you, "You stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about"? And so the way that you were parented unconsciously causes you to parent yourself that way, whether you shut down your own emotions, whether you judge and you shame yourself for making a mistake and then you beat yourself up. So that voice of that inner critic is the voice of the parent's inner critic that gets downloaded onto you. And so if you don't have a parent that was constant and that was predictable, that showed up, you will feel this sense of anxious attachment, which is this need, this seeking connection. In adulthood, later on, you have a story in your nervous system that love is not consistent. So I'm going to chase. I'm going to constantly scan. If dad left, one of my clients' dad left at the age of 3. So now, because of that detachment from dad, she now developed what's called an anxious attachment, where she's now hyper vigilantly chasing and seeking, in a moment of conflict, she's the one texting, "Are we going to be okay? Can we talk? We need to talk now, 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 now." So that's anxious attachment. That's constantly seeking connection during a conflict. So the attachment styles really are a window to how we respond to distress and conflict within relational dynamics. So the anxious attachment, which I just spoke of, the opposite style is called the avoidant, that wants space, that wants tempo. And the avoidant, growing up, experienced big emotions, and they didn't have a parent show up and say, "Hey, I'm here for you." So the expression of their emotions did not warrant any type of relief. So what they decided was, you know what, there's no point in me sharing anything. I'm just going to go and I'm going to become an island. And I'm just going to deal whenever I have big kind of like emotional charge come up, I'm going to back away from everybody else and I'm just going to go and deal with it on my own. And the crazy part about this is the avoidant isn't attracted to other avoidants. The avoidant has an anxious part of them in their shadow that deeply wants connection. And the anxious has a avoidant part of them deep in their psyche that just is afraid to get close to anyone because they're going to get hurt. So these two attachment styles, the anxious and the avoidant, are a perfect storm for one another. So
And magnets.
they magnet one another. And so the way that that looks in a relational dynamic is a trigger happens, a conflict happens, the avoidance, like, I got to fuck off and go on my own. I got to deal with this on my own. And the anxious one is like, come back, come back. And they just get like more needy and they get more pushy, which causes the avoidant to push further away, which causes the anxious to push further and the avoidant to pull away. And that's called the infinite loop of doom. So these unresolved attachment styles, and of course, we have the other style called the fearful avoidant or the disorganized, which is kind of like a mix of both, one foot on the gas, one foot on the brake, because as a child you wanted connection, but your parent was dangerous. They were physically violent. So you're afraid. So on one hand, you want it. On the other hand, you're terrified. So they keep going back and forth in this push and pull, and it's utterly confusing. And it costs so much chaos, health issues. It affects your work. And you just because you don't feel stable at home, you can't really kind of succeed as to your potential in your career because the home front feels like a battlefield, not a sanctuary. So these attachment styles, anxious attachment, avoidant, disorganized or fearful avoidant, we're all, these aren't your destiny. If you learn what they are and you go through a process of rewiring these patterns, you have to be willing, you have to believe that you can, you got to be willing to do the work. What I discovered going from an avoidant to a secure relationship is that the relationship you don't need chaos to assume that it's love. You can feel safe uh, in like stability, feel safe, and a relationship that feels like home. Just by being around one another, your nervous systems co-regulate one another rather than co-dysregulate, which is what I was doing in my previous relationship. So this is a huge topic, and we spend a while, unpacking it and healing it, but learning what your attachment style is what your attachment style is a good start so that we know exactly how to rewire from anxious to a more secure. So if you're more anxious, you're going to learn how to self-regulate so that you're not needing the other person to then feel safe. And if you're avoidant, you're learning how to co-regulate so that you're not running away a first sign of trouble. What I had to do, and like, for example, my instinct was to run away and take my space. And then it was like to pause and then lean into repairing rather than running away. So if you're willing to do the work, on the other side of it is probably the greatest experience in as a human, which is to feel genuine connection and safety with the person that you're with.
Now, thank you for that explanation. And I firmly believe many of our listeners are going to immediately relate to this. And one
Yeah,
thing I'm really curious about, because you said something very important just now. One, all change starts with awareness. Two, you've got to be willing to do the work. But one critical aspect of this discussion is the fact that these codependent relationships take two. You've got two
correct.
codependent individuals, usually on opposite ends of the great polarity, which is what creates the magnetism. What happens when you've
Correct.
got one individual that's willing to do the work and then the avoidant as one easy example. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
how are there opportunities to really
Yeah.
create a healthy
Great
relationship?
question.
Is it more important to start with you and then
Yeah.
all that comes to now I can make healthier decisions from this place? Expand
Yeah.
on that a bit if you would.
Yeah, I love it. Great question. So it's like often what'll happen is the anxious partner is going to reach out to me and
Yeah.
say, I never hear from the avoidant. I only hear from the anxious one. And the anxious one is like,
Gotcha.
is there any, is this relationship salvageable? Can we fix this? They don't do the work and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Usually when I get on a call with them and I ask them, how does it feel? They will then answer their question about themselves by talking about their partner. That's kind of like the first red flag that I look for. And I'm like, I didn't ask about them because I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you.
Mhm.
And it really, they become very aware that their entire life is based on orienting to the other person. And I ask them this question. I say, of course they have work to do. Everybody's got woundings that they've been carrying. In business, you have weaknesses. Well, you delegate those weaknesses to somebody who's better at it. But in relationships, we can't really delegate. We got to work on those things, right? That's the problem with, seven, eight, sorry, eight, nine figure entrepreneurs. They all had health and relational problems. When I kind of like saw somebody who interviewed like a bunch of nine-figure entrepreneurs, all of them had health problems and relational problems. Right? I mean, look at Elon, for example. How many,
Mhm.
so you can send a rocket, you can send a rocket ship and a space shuttle to Mars, but you can't have a healthy relationship. So if that's the
Yeah.
case in your case, you're in good company. So I ask them this question. You just have to ask them this question. If both of you are wounded, both of you have these unresolved woundings, ideally both of you work on them together. That would be ideal. I have couples in my cycle breakers community that are both they went through betrayal trauma. They're both doing the work individually. They're on the group calls. They're doing it as individuals, not couple. I don't do couples counseling. I do individual work, taking full responsibility for your own wounding. The question is if two of you were 300 pounds overweight, do you need the other person to lose the weight with you in order for you to do it? And the answer is, of course not. The fear is that what if I do the work and then discover that we're no longer compatible? That is one of the biggest obstacles that the codependent will face,
Yeah.
is that they're secretly doing the work to fix the relationship. And I say that's not what this is about. This is about you. That old relationship must die. You must let that go. And that's the most terrifying part of it, because you're now walking this path towards healing yourself and allowing the chips to fall where they may. Because here's one of two things are going to happen. That avoidant that is not doing the work all of a sudden sees that you're no longer obsessively, going after them and trying to fix them or whatever. And now their anxious parts start to come up. Holy shit, I'm going to lose this person. So by you doing the work, you're going to step up to a place where you truly love yourself, where you're no longer going to tolerate any type of relationship that isn't like high standards and high quality. This person has one of two options: step up to meet you because they're afraid of losing you, or you discover that they are not going to do it and it wasn't the right relationship after all. And that is the the risk and the choice that you must take. You must decide to do it, not to save the relationship, but to heal the relationship with you that caused you to constantly have to chase, to constantly feel like who you are is not worthy, that you need to prove, that you need to chase. So you're healing the wounds that started this unhealthy dynamic. And by you shifting the energy, they will change. Either they'll rise to meet you, or you will discover, which will be a benefit, that it wasn't the right match and you will no longer tolerate anything less than high standards, which is the ultimate goal. So you got to lead, you got to go first, because a rising tide lifts all boats.
Wholeheartedly agree. One thing I would love your perspective on is I have to imagine that many listeners are thinking, hey, that's fantastic if I'm just in a, traditional relationship. But if I'm married with kids, We built a life together. I'm now identifying these patterns. Start doing
Mhm.
this work. Now it's not a decision that just impacts the relationship, but it's a decision that could ultimately impact the entire family dynamic. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of fears around those conversations, the financial risk and implications that now I don't get to see my kids every day of the week. I mean, how do you help couples or maybe the individual navigate that when somebody
Yeah.
is at a crossroads and now it feels like they're deciding between their family, their kids, that core component of their life, and also what's healthiest for them long term.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. So people are not going to change because to go in this direction to do this work, you're going into an unknown. So that's scary. But the only way that people will do that is if the known is so painful that it's unsustainable. So you look and you see what is the impact on the kids of watching the two people just hate each other and to be in that environment which isn't healthy. And so as far if we're looking at what the impact is on the kids is, is it healthy to keep them in an environment where there's a lack of emotional safety? Once you've established that it isn't, that it's to everybody's benefit, that we kind of separate and figure stuff out, that's when you decide, the work begins. This reminds me of one client. They have three kids, Pam, and she, there was an affair that happened, and so for 10 years they were trying to do talk therapy, and he wasn't really taking any ownership, wasn't changing, and he was just like, no, she wanted to leave. She wasn't sure because she felt hurt. He wasn't really owning up to it the way that she wanted. There wasn't connection, and finally she decides to jump in and start working on the issue, and she realizes, holy crap, the entire relationship was based on a codependent wound where she was constantly having to try to prove herself. And then she realized, I don't have to do that anymore. And on a couples therapy session, she turns to her husband and says, I think we're done. And he's like, okay, I understand. So he actually helped her move. They have three kids. So they moved a few blocks away from one another. He helped her move and they began their life separately. And she continued her inner work and inner journey. And it wasn't until about 6 months to 8 months after she had moved out, he shows up at her door and he had done his deep work too, right? It was beyond just talk therapy because people think talk therapy, telling your story and staying at the level of the story is doing the work. It's not. It's doing something, right? We're labeling it, but we're talking about like you have to go underneath the story at the unworthy identity that created it. So the work I do is go at an identity level transformation. It's not telling your story, it's understanding who the narrator of that story has been and deciding on who you're becoming instead, right? And once that shift was made within her, he then is like, oh crap, I got to do that too. And so he stepped up, he learned new skills. And then within a year, they got back together. But it wasn't until she decided that this is what's best, like the question you want to ask is like, what would a person who loves themselves do? Would a person who loves themselves stay in a relationship where they are constantly being neglected? Right. So, what do you want to model to your kids? And so, the way that I do this, the way that to answer your question, when people come in, should I stay or go, is the main question. And I have a webinar that's called Should I Stay or Go? When
Hmm.
you can really look into that. The answer I look for is there abuse happening? And they say, no, 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 there's nothing like that. Okay, great. Because if there's abuse, then we need to has a different conversation. You need to get out and you need to kind of like find safety. But if there is safety, it's just disconnection, betrayal, and hurt feelings, then I recommend you stay and you use the relational triggers there where you're at to go deeper within and to heal the unconscious wounding that had you and them a perfect dynamic for one another. And once you heal that, the answer emerges naturally because who you become on the other side of it is compassionate, understanding. And so you then make a decision with an open heart rather than FU energy. So
Yeah.
that's the goal, is to create safety from within and then turn the nervous system kind of into a place of safety. From there, you can make a decision. So finding safety within the nervous system is the first goal.
That makes complete sense. I mean, what I'd be curious. I mean, there's so many things. There's so many tangents I'd like to explore here.
We should have
And
another
obviously,
call.
we're gonna have to. This is a very deep conversation. I mean,
Yeah.
one thing I'm curious about is, and I imagine some of the listeners are starting to think about through now, is like, okay, well, now what? What's next? I mean, what are some of the various healing modalities and practices? Where should
Yeah.
people start exploring? I mean, I know you mentioned your quiz before. Great place to
Yeah.
start creating some objective perspective. But talk a little bit about some of the different healing modalities that you practice, and
Yeah.
maybe there's a first step, an exercise that
Yeah.
somebody can progress through. I love that question, by the way. What would somebody do that truly loves themselves?
Yeah.
What decision
Yeah.
would they make? I mean, that's powerful. But talk about a bit about
Yeah.
that, if you would.
So I answered people like, where do I begin? I had before COVID, I had a 3-day event called the Overview Experience, where I teach a methodology of how to take whatever trigger is coming up and you learn how to recenter yourself. Really, that's the best place to start, is to learn
Mm.
that. It used to be a 3-day event. People would fly in, it costs a couple $1,000. People would fly in, get hotels, and then COVID hit. And then I was like, oh shit, I had to cancel about six events internationally, and I was like,
Uh,
I wonder if I could take this magical event and turn it into maybe a 1 day type of thing on Zoom. And it turns out I did. It worked.
mm,
And so it was the Overview Experience, which has now been relabeled, rebranded as the Trigger Proof Experience. I
mm,
do it once a month on Zoom, and it
mm,
is from noon Pacific time to 6 p.m. Pacific. So it's 3 to 9 Eastern. And it's the starting point. It's the starting point. What modalities do I use? I use somatic work and a blend of polyvagal theory, somatic work, shadow work, and cognitive awareness to help you make sense of how you got there. That's the first step, because most of the time when people are in that situation, they're just so confused and they're so resentful. And underneath the confusion and resentment, there is a F ton of shame and guilt of, how did I end up here? And how, like, oh, I'm just, after all the work that I've done and I'm still in this frustrating state. Like, why? Like, I wanted to answer that by taking them through the entire journey of the biggest trigger within the conflict that they're going through, unpacking it, and then seeing the unconscious wounding that's at the helm of it. Because it's never about what it's about. It's never just about the betrayal. Like, for example, one client that's starting, just started with me this week. She discovered her husband had an affair, and she's just like, wow, this is the second relationship that I'm in, where I was cheated on. So my first husband betrayed me, and now this is happening again. And I like, it's the same thing, but a different guy. Like, what's going on? And so the trigger proof experience helps to answer that and unshame the process. Turns out she was 3 years old. Her father left her mother, and she felt this sense of betrayal. There was an affair that happened, so there was an imprint in her nervous system that this is what men do. So in a weird way, this is going to sound very weird, but it's her nervous system is unconsciously seeking that familiarity to repeat that pattern, because there's a couple theories on it. There's this unconscious parts of us that just want to heal, that want to arise so that we can heal it. That's one theory, which has some credence to it. There's another theory, is that we're seeking to have those emotions come up again. We are unconsciously choosing partners that are like walking red flags, because it's just this experience of betrayal, this experience of not, in my case, having my reality denied. I constant, which is what happened in my childhood quite a bit with my parents. I'm constantly meeting partners that will deny my reality. It's called the repetition compulsion.
Mhm.
So we have a compulsion to repeat what's familiar as an opportunity to heal it. And the trigger proof experience is this event where I walk you through that entire process to help you make sense of it and to teach you a tool in how to expand that space between stimulus and response so you're not reacting from that same wound and that you can choose from your adult self. So that's literally the best place to begin. It's why I created that event, and it's a monthly event with my community uh, to answer those questions.
What I'm wondering, Nima, is, there's I mean, I don't want to call it the obvious, but I guess the relatable aspects of where we can see this surface in relationships. But I wonder if those same scars, if you would agree, do they cause us to project and relive those same patterns in financial mistakes, other aspects of
Oh
life?
yeah.
Is it transcendent like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, financial mistakes, when I look at the financial mistakes, um, it's this get rich quick scheme. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get this. It's based on dopamine rather than um, slow wealth accumulation that's not done through emotion. It's
Discipline.
not done. It's done through discipline, through consistency, through um, just kind of like it's kind of like habits, spending less than you make. Like it's not very sexy.
Mhm.
So, but it's like the chasing energy. It's
Mhm.
dopamine driven. When I look back on my quote unquote financial mistakes,
Yeah.
that's basically what it was because the discipline, it was basically to prove it was improving energy, and it came from an identity of scarcity. It came from an identity of I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I did a psilocybin journey a while back, and I realized just exactly as you said, how overlapping they are. And I just kind of like saw the impact of the belief that I wasn't loved by my mother. With the journey, it was weird. I just saw the divine feminine, and she basically was like, I've always been there. And it sounds very simple when I say it, but what I realized in that moment was the entire foundational premise of my relationship with money, my relationship with women, was that the feminine will not be there. So I need to perform, I need to extract from, because it's not inherently there. Right. So it's how I showed up in relationships with women, which was extractive. What can I get from her? In my last relationship that I talked about, I was using her for sex. She was working in my business. Like I was just using. When we use, why do we use? Because we're using from an extracted type of energy. This
Mhm.
translates with translated in my life with women. And
Mhm.
then I looked, I'm like, oh my God, it translates in my life with clients. I'm using them to extract so that you know, I could then feel enough because I wasn't there. The framework of my identity was that I wasn't enough as I am. So you're hitting the nail on the head when you're saying,
Yeah.
does it overlap? It overlaps with anything. Love, sex, money, it's all interrelated. It's your relationship with divinity and what you believe that who you believe that you are and what you believe that you're worth. So it transcends
Yeah.
into everything.
Totally see that. I have a feeling that many listeners right now are feeling a bit I can't think of any other
Called
word to
out,
use, but mind
called
deaf.
out,
Mind deaf. Like
mind fucked.
I'll put it the right way. Mind fucked. Yeah, because like the truth is, like you
Cheers.
start thinking, holy shit, like did all these decisions, the way you've been showing up, I mean, is like what does a healthy relationship even look like? I mean,
Yeah,
you know, Nima,
totally.
as we wrap up today's episode, imagine it's decades from now. The books you've have all been written, the stages have gone quiet, the interviews are finished, your children, your family, your closest friends, the people whose lives you've impacted are sitting together remembering your life. What do you hope they say? What do you hope your legacy became?
He helped me love myself because of Nima's work. I truly love myself.
Mm.
I truly have built a relationship with myself. I found who I am and I feel safe with myself and I love myself. And by the way, what you were saying before, you know, Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you'll call it fate. So the whole foundation of all of my work is helping people make these frustrating dynamics with money, sex, relationship conscious, because there's unconscious dynamics at play and they're easy to explain once you see them clearly. And when I looked, I was like, frick, no wonder all of my relationships were cataclysmic failures. No wonder I couldn't hold on to money. No wonder I was constantly having to prove. And
Yeah.
once you see these unconscious complexes, now the awareness is only the first step. Now the next step is to rewire that slowly but surely. And so, is there work involved? Yes. Does it happen overnight? No. But
Mhm.
you know,
Is it worth it? Yes.
is it painful? Yeah, but
Yeah.
not doing it is downright unbearable. So
Yeah.
that's why I teach what I most need to learn.
That's beautiful. I mean, get comfortable getting uncomfortable because that's the way life transforms. I mean, if someone wants to connect with you, learn more about your work,
Yeah.
where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, my website is should be there in the show notes. Become
Hmm.
trigger proof,
Hmm.
and social media Nima Rahmany official. Send me a DM. But the best place is to do the quiz, and once you're done the quiz, hit reply. Send me an email. Tell me what your backstory is. I read them all, and if you have any questions, I'm there.
Beautiful. Well, I hope today's conversation challenged you, and not because it was uncomfortable, but because growth often begins where comfort ends. So, one thing I continually come back to is this: we spend so much time trying to optimize our businesses, our finances, productivity, fitness, while completely overlooking the operating system running underneath of it all. Sometimes the next level isn't about doing more. It's about healing what has quietly been holding us back. So, a huge thank you to Nima Rahmany for joining us today and sharing his wisdom. I mean, if you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who could benefit from it. Until next time, keep growing, keep learning, and remember, growth isn't a destination, it's a decision you make every single day. We'll see you on the next episode. Nima, thank you so much for joining us today.